Star Wars Skeleton Crew is over, but we do have some teases about what could be next, and honestly, I don't hate the ideas that they're talking about. Welcome to Star Wars Uplink. Skeleton Crew was one of those shows that I think really shines a light on what Star Wars can be when it steps out of its own way. There weren't any big cameos, there wasn't the whole Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the TV meme style things with this show. And honestly, it just reminds me so much of what I love about Mandalorian Season 1 and what I thought they were going to do with Star Wars going forward. I think if we continue to have things that evoked Skeleton Crew, evoked Andor, evoked Mandalorian Season 1, I think people's perception of Star Wars would be in a much different place. I think the early failings and something that we're going to look back on this time frame, maybe a decade or more, I think what we're going to look back on and say is, man, they tried to do Marvel when Star Wars isn't Marvel. I think Skeleton Crew really shined a light on what Star Wars does really well, which is having that childish view of the galaxy, but having some big things happen. Luke Skywalker was a farm boy on a desert planet who had never really seen the galaxy. His dream was to join the Empire, basically, get into flight training and get into this space where he could leave Tatooine and join the larger galaxy through the eyes of a naive farm boy, someone who didn't have that perspective. And I think going back and calling back to that is where Star Wars does itself the most justice. And I think Skeleton Crew is a great example of that. But in terms of Skeleton Crew Season 2, co-creator John Watts says this: "We have ideas in our heads for sure. We're waiting to find out what everyone else thinks, but we've always had an idea of where this could go, even before we made the first season. So there's a lot of potential out there, and I hope everyone sees that." And he continues to say that they would make the kids older. Quote, "We wouldn't pretend like the kids are only 6 months older if we made more. It's fun to think of them growing up and where they would fit into the galaxy and how their world would be changed by the events of what happened in the first season." Almost similar to this idea of Stranger Things Season 2, how these big things happen to these kids and they have to kind of work through themselves personally to recover from those events while also realizing everything has changed because of those events. And I just love this idea, and I think that this is the proper way to go about, rather than what Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau are doing, where they pretend that no time has passed in between seasons and everything's part of this very condensed timeline, and they seem like they're afraid of really expanding things more and possibly going to an end point, because there's a limited time frame that they have in terms of this era before they have to start making stuff make sense with the rise of the First Order, the kind of height and then slow destruction of the New Republic. What does that look like? How does that get there? There's a limited time frame before they start having to ask themselves that question. So I understand their motivation, but I think it's routed in fear rather than what the creators of Skeleton Crew are like. Yeah, we would make sure that they have an impact in this galaxy, that they continue moving things along, because it would do the characters disservice if we kept them in this role, in this time frame, in this character pit. Because I think honestly, Season 1 of The Mandalorian had incredible character growth. Season 2 had a slower character growth. Book of Boba Fett erased all of that character growth for The Mandalorian. And then Season 3 of The Mandalorian had zero character growth for basically every character, which is unfortunate and kind of the thing that really sours me on this style of filmmaking that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau are trying to push more into this. If you look at Ahsoka, I think that's the clearest example of a show where nothing happens. They make these broad strokes and gestures to pretend like things are happening, but if you really look into the details, there's no character growth, there's no character development. The galaxy doesn't necessarily change in key ways, and it's just a stepping stone in the galaxy, which I think is very unfortunate for that show in particular. And I think for the Mandoverse in general, I think they've done a poor job of giving the galaxy stakes and letting their characters grow and expand in ways that make sense for that character. Every character within Skeleton Crew is themselves. They do things motivated by their character arcs. Their motivations are different from each and every one of them. And I think that's the thing that makes Skeleton Crew work so well. That you have these co-leads, an adult with Jude Law, and then a set of kids, with each of these kids having different perspectives of the world that they came from, different goals in terms of getting back to the planet. And I think Wim has the biggest character growth and arc there of wanting to explore the galaxy while also realizing, hey, I miss home, but I don't miss home for the reasons that I miss home that everyone else has. I want to continue to explore. I want to see this galaxy. I want to be a part of something bigger and have an adventure. If you look at Andor, it's the same way. Each character is motivated by something entirely different, moving the whole story further, the plot forward. Meanwhile, the story as a whole moves in this other direction, but the characters within that world are making decisions based off of their experiences and their goals and their perspectives, which I think is just so good and unique. One of the interviews, they said they had discussed possibly doing a flashback scene for Jod, but realized that this is a story grounded in the kids' experience and the kids' perspective on this galaxy. And it would take away from the story to have a needless flashback when you can motivate the characters without that. He mentions briefly his path to get where he is and the reason he makes these decisions without having a flashback. Take that, Ahsoka, and your freaking forced in flashbacks for the Clone Wars. I understand why they do it for Ahsoka, but I think that show would be better if they didn't lean so heavily on a TV show that most people watching it didn't watch and didn't. I think Ahsoka mainly fails. It fails for many reasons, but I think one of the key things is they didn't trust their audience and they didn't give enough real footing for the audience to take the next steps. But this show, I think, is great. I would love to see it get a second season. I think it deserves more of a second season than something like Acolyte did in terms of how they're approaching this, because they didn't go into it saying we're gonna do all these things and we're gonna take our time and we're gonna have all of these things happen but not really move much forward like Acolyte ended up being. It was just kind of very messy from a storyline perspective and what they were trying to say, which doesn't make it necessarily unenjoyable for some people. But for me, I go to these shows and I go for these stories for the story themselves, not for the characters that I really appreciate or anything like that. So I am looking forward to seeing hopefully more from the Skeleton Crew. If not, something like a pirate show would be awesome. I would love to see the pirates' world shaken by this revelation that this treasure planet that has been talked about and hyped up for hundreds of years. I would love to see that perspective. What does it look like for the Republic and the Rangers of the New Republic to be involved in that? I would love to see that. I think there's a lot of conflict, which breeds story, which breeds all of these things, the character growth. I think that could be very fascinating, and we've just seen a taste of it with Skeleton Crew. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. Would you like to see another season of Skeleton Crew? How much did you enjoy this one? And let me know in the comments below. Check out our podcast, and may the Force be with you.